Hello, hello, loves. You are listening to the Love Life with Court show. And as always, I'm your host, Courtney. If this is your first time tuning into the pod, well, welcome to the family. And if not, here is a warm welcome back. Without further ado, let's get started on today's episode. Hello, loves. I hope you are all having the most amazing day. Thank you for tuning in. Before we start today's episode, I have a huge favor to ask you, which is going to check out my website, www.lovelifewithcourt.com, and signing up for my email list. Before I go any further, I promise you that you will not receive spam from me, but what this does, it is allows me to promote my podcast more, allows to have a greater reach, and the more people we reach, the more people we are helping to heal and grow and build a more positive healing mindset. Anywho, let's get started on today's topic, which is triggers. So I want to dive deep into understanding it and as well as sharing with you what I have learned along the journey. So first things first is a trigger is anything that causes a person to relive a past trauma or past response. So examples of emotional triggers could include things like memories, objects, people or events, even a simple word, a smell, anything like that that sparks intense negative emotions or some form of emotional reaction. So to be more specific, you could be telling your husband or your wife to stop leaving the clothes on the floor. And then days and days go by and there are clothes on the floor again. So by seeing the clothes on the floor, you become triggered. Now, this is just a very simple, more generic example, but obviously it can also be like a past relationship where you have certain traumas or responses to situations because of how you were treated previously. Now, not all triggers are negative. They can stimulate immense joy or happy memories, like a certain smell or environment. Like just the other day, I was sitting in my car and I had my windows down and I could smell someone barbecuing. And I don't know why. The specific smell just reminded me of being at my grandpa's house when I was a kid, sitting on the deck in the backyard, and it just brought back all these joyful memories. But for this episode, we will be focusing on the negative or unwanted responses that are an outcome of a trigger, or as many say, becoming triggered. So how do you recognize a trigger? Common responses to triggers are things like feeling self-conscious, being discounted, feeling we are controlled or taken advantage of, being vulnerable or uncomfortable with what's happening. And it could also stem from things like fear or possibly fearing what might happen. Now, these are the root responses, like what's really going on within and why we may respond in certain ways. And what happens with these typical responses that we see are we're suppressing emotions, trying to escape from the situation, acting out, becoming defensive, all of which are a way to suppress the underlying emotion and work through them. Like I said, you may respond with anger, you may respond with becoming very defensive, but what you are actually responding to are the feelings of being self-conscious or being discounted or feeling that you are being controlled or taken advantage of. Whatever it is, there is some underlying emotion that is going on. And when we don't properly deal with it, that's where we become triggered and have maybe irrational responses. And to understand this more, when we're triggered, our bodies engage in the survival response. So this is fighting, fleeing, or freezing. Our hearts might race, we break into a sweat, we could go cold, and the sympathetic nervous system is activated to save us from perceived harm. Hence, when these triggers activate your fight and flight response, you are unable to think clearly and properly assess the underlying emotional work that needs to be done. So today, we're really going to dive into how to identify you are becoming triggered before you have a triggered response. Now, typically, there are two solutions to avoiding becoming triggered. One, you can avoid situations that result in you becoming triggered. Now, for instances, this is required based on the circumstances. So possibly you experience some form of abuse from someone, and it's just better that you avoid all situations where you need to see that person, think of that person, speak to that person, whatever it is. But in many situations, the best way to work through a trigger is to learn and grow by understanding the trigger, why you become triggered, and identifying coping mechanisms that no longer result in your fight and flight response becoming activated. Because as I said, the whole reason that we have this elaborate response to things, or a very intense response, is because when certain things happen, our sympathetic nervous system is activated because we think that we are being attacked, and our fight and flight becomes activated. The other day I was going for a run and I was thinking about how I was going to approach this episode. And as I was running by the water near my house, I saw the red and green buoys that are in the water. And the red buoys typically resemble, like there's a rock there or something that the boat can hit. And the green is where it is safe. And what I want through this analogy is for you to have a greater understanding of how working through your triggers long term have significant benefits. So first question is what had to happen to be able to recognize not to hit the rocks? Well, people needed to hit the rocks. And how did the green buoy end up where it is? It had to practice going around the rock and learning how to avoid it. So someone set up that red buoy because they had hit the rocks multiple times, or maybe multiple people have hit those rocks. So they set up the red buoy, but then someone also had to practice going around these rocks to figure out where this green buoy is. This red buoy is you becoming triggered. And to understand when you're becoming triggered, well, what needs to happen? You need to get triggered. You need to hit those rocks. And you possibly need to hit them multiple times to have an understanding that this has become a pattern. When this happens, you become triggered. Now, to be able to get that green buoy, to know that this is a safe zone where you will not become triggered or where you will not hit these rocks, what do you need to do? Well, you need to practice going around these rocks. You need to practice experiencing these triggers and learn ways to deal through them. You need to experience what these triggers feel like, feeling unsafe or feeling fearful, feeling angry, to be able to recognize how you can feel safe, where you feel comfortable, and where you are able to outlet these emotions, and to have a deeper understanding of what I mean by this. When we develop the tools to handle our triggers, we transform a 2-part experience into a 3-part practice. Initially, where you may be at is you become triggered, then you have a reaction. But when you work through these triggers, it can become, you become triggered, you have a reaction, and you identify a resource. And with enough practice, it can become a better 2-part experience where you become triggered and you know the resource. You know how to work through it in the best way, where you now have a permanent green buoy and you know exactly where to go to avoid these rocks and avoid these responses or reactions. So let's dig into this a little bit deeper. What can you do when you're triggered? How can you begin to identify these resources where you know how to deal through this trigger, avoid having an unnecessary reaction where it does not serve you emotionally or serve the situation? Well, first thing is to name it. Where is the trigger stemming from? Like I mentioned at the beginning, recognize what deep emotional response is going on. Not I'm feeling angry, because that is just a suppressing emotion, an emotion that we use to suppress what's really going on. But are you feeling self-conscious? Are you feeling discounted? Are you feeling controlled or taken advantage of? Are you feeling fearful, vulnerable, uncomfortable? Name it, recognize it. Then identify the source of a trigger reaction. What is going on that is causing you to respond or feel this way? Is it a specific event or trauma? Is it a person? Is it a smell? Is it a sense? Whatever it is central to freeing ourselves from it. What is the root cause of this trigger? No matter what it is, you can almost always relate it to some kind of past experience where you possibly didn't feel heard. You had promised yourself that you would never put yourself in that situation again. And it could also be something that's inward. Possibly you are triggering yourself. You are having these habits that are no longer serving you, that are causing you to react in these certain situations. Number 3 is being aware of projection. Trigger reactions are about projection. When we become triggered, we are simply projecting what we are feeling within. This is because your body fears a repetition of that original sequence, even though anger and violence aren't inevitably linked. So most important, when we make our reaction all about other people, it leaves us powerless because we can't change them. And when we take ownership of our reactions, we take a step toward healing and letting go of the original trauma response or experience that we had. Number 4 is trying an echo response. So if someone is shaming or insulting us, we can simply repeat aloud to that person slowly the exact words that are triggering. And this creates a pause that can prevent us from being bowled over or feeling victimized. So if someone is telling you something and you feel personally attacked by those words, first of all, that may not be their intentions. And what you can do is use the words that they have said, say it back to them for clarification or to understand further. So trying this echo response. And to go back and being aware of projection. You may have someone in your life who very much cares for you and is still learning possibly things that happened in your past, and they may not understand that certain things trigger you. And now you are responding in a way that may not be their intentions where you currently are. So really try to understand, am I projecting on what I think that person's or this situation's intentions are? And number 5 is finding the humor. If it's possible, find the humor in a triggering situation. So this is for more of our lighter triggers. And this is one of the fastest ways to diffuse the stress response. When we are able to find humor in things and laugh it off, it's kind of like we are tricking our brain and shutting off that fight and flight response. When we are feeling humorous, we are not relying on our sympathetic nervous system to respond to that situation. Instead, we are having a more relaxing response to this. So we are able to deal with it in a more quicker and effective way. And the last one is practicing acceptance. As upsetting and challenging as triggers can be, it can help to remember that they are one of the body's ways of pointing us towards our own healing and wholeness. A practice of accepting what we cannot change, knowing that people will say or do things that set us off, for instance, is a way to be kind to ourselves. We don't have to accept the ways that people treat us or the situations that arise, but we can learn to take in stride that triggering events will happen. Things will happen. But if we can either laugh it off or recognize that this has nothing to do with you and relying on the resources that we just talked about, like naming it, identifying the source of the trigger reaction, being aware of projection. Is this the person's or the experience's intentions, or is this a past trauma that I am currently reliving and working through? Trying an echo response. So if this situation is particularly with someone or the words that someone may use, echoing it back to them, finding the humor in things, and as we talked about, practicing acceptance. I want to leave you with this. If you don't heal what you hurt, you'll probably end up bleeding on people who didn't cut you. So keep that in mind. It's time to take our trigger and reaction, turn it into a 3-part practice of trigger, reaction, and resource. And with enough practice, it can become a better 2-part experience where we feel triggered and we immediately know what resources to use And we can find our green buoy. We can avoid the red buoy. Don't hit the rocks. Know where you're safe. I love you all. And a friendly reminder to not only be kind to others, but also to your beautiful, amazing self.